Welcome to week 2 of COP27, and today I'm at Shepperlands Farm, which is another Berks, Bucks and Oxen Wildlife Trust reserve, and it's one of the examples of reserves that have been gifted to the Trust from individuals. And this farm is a mix of really beautiful, some ancient oak woodland, broadleaf woodland, meadow, and a little bit of heathland as well. So it's a really nice little spot, quite a small reserve, just tucked away. And there's a roe deer over the field, very foggy field, looking at me as I'm recording this. And over the course of the weekend, we've really seen not much progress, to be honest, from what we were expecting on Friday. So the mood, I think, coming out of the conference at the minute feels quite low and a little bit depressed. We're still waiting really for final text across a whole range of issues from the different negotiating groups. On loss and damage, there's now draft text that talks about a multilateral fund to help with the compensation for different damages from climate change. That's really being championed by the G77, which is the group of mainly developing country bloc, which does a lot of the leadership on the issues that are relevant to developing countries. But not a lot of enthusiasm for that text at the minute from developed countries, and I suspect that's going to rumble on all week to see where loss and damage ends up. Similarly, on Article 6, we don't yet have any final text, apart from the text around the really detailed mechanics of how the Article 6 mechanism will work. So we're still waiting to see bolder text about what constitutes different types of carbon credits. So we'll be keeping an eye on that one as well. And over the weekend, we've heard criticism of the presidency for not yet bringing forward a really strong deal to form the kind of final text from the negotiating parties. And we haven't seen much progress on the theme days either. And over the weekend, we had the Agriculture and Adaptation theme day. And although there were lots of discussions, particularly around the issue of how you feed 8 billion people in a changing climate, we didn't really see the level of announcements that we were seeing from COP26 last year for each of the theme days. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as the week goes forward as well. Now, interestingly, we have seen some text coming out over the weekend on a global goal for adaptation. And this is quite new because in previous years, we haven't really seen quantified outcomes coming out of the negotiating text. But today, the text does have a series of clauses looking at things like 100% of the population having access to early warning systems and having national adaptation plans by 2025. And by 2050, 100% of the population seeing reduced vulnerability to climate change. So that's all text in brackets at the moment. We'll have to see if that carries on through. But it's interesting to see that there is action to try and come up with this quantified goal for adaptation. And that's not something we have in the UK, so we still don't have a really precise outcome for adaptation through the national adaptation programmes for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And we're expecting to see the next set of national adaptation plans coming out in 2023. And I know there's work going on to try and look at quantifying those outcomes. So it's interesting to see that we actually might see progress on that on the international stage before we actually see it in the UK. And it's something we really need because part of the task of scaling up finance on something like adaptation is needing this quantified goal, this outcome that everybody shares and everybody can work towards. And we've seen that, really clearly with the net zero goal in the UK and globally as well, that organisations are willing to put money in, to put investment in order to help their progress in meeting that goal. And we don't have that on adaptation. And over the weekend as well, we saw new reports coming out just looking at the finance gap for adaptation globally. So at the minute, UNEP predicts that we are spending about 30 billion globally on adaptation, but they say we need to spend something more like 340 billion per year. And alongside that, we saw reports coming out looking at how much of GDP for different African countries is being spent on adaptation at the minute. And it's a huge number, something like between 5 and 10% of GDP for countries like Ethiopia and Zimbabwe, which is much more than, say, the UK has been predicted to spend even in the future. So we know it's becoming an increasingly urgent and increasingly pressing issue across all of the African countries. And you would expect, therefore, to see that the adaptation text coming out of this COP is going to be much stronger than we've seen previously. So over the next few days, what we're really going to be looking for is that increased impetus from the Egyptian presidency to start getting some finalised cover text decided and put out there and agreed by all of the negotiating nations. As we said today, progress isn't looking very good on that, but you kind of expect that in the middle of a COP, although they are further behind than maybe the presidency was last year and at previous COPs as well. And one thing I've been thinking right from the beginning is, will we actually see a walkout of negotiating parties? Now, I've been at COPs where this has happened before, and we haven't seen it for quite some time, and this is where really things get to such a stalemate that parties just start leaving the negotiating room and don't come back until some sort of compromise is reached. So we may or may not see that happening this week, and we'll be looking at, what areas of progress are being made and maybe where those issues might come apart. Certainly on the cover text that could happen. It could also happen on loss and damage. So we'll be bringing you updates again on Wednesday this week to see where things have got to. See you then.